Hello and welcome back to another gameplay video. Today we are still playing in the TTI League, but not one of the 8 qualifying games. But we still have some time to kill before the next season and the Top Cut. So I thought, why not just continue? And in a prior video, I promised to go back to Palpatine, or to actually play Palpatine. We played against a blue Palpatine list, and I talked at length about why I really liked the deck as well. And if you have already seen that, you can just skip ahead to the gameplay, and because I'm probably gonna say just repeat myself from that video. But let's go over the deck and let me explain why I really think it's quite interesting. So Palpatine, being a leader that deploys on 8 resources, is naturally a control leader, right? And the ability to take your opponent's best card, take control of, is very, very good, and against some decks can kind of give you a huge advantage just on the matchup alone. But the weakness, of course, when you're deploying on 8 resources, is always going to be aggro. When it comes to Palpatine, people always ask, okay, it's interesting, but can it beat aggro? And that's, of course, something you have to keep in mind when you're building Palpatine, but sometimes it might not actually be the correct thing. Sometimes you might want to just sacrifice a poor matchup against aggro to have really good matchups against other decks. In that case, I would consider the deck more as a meta deck, where you try to predict the meta at your tournament and build something that's going to be good at exactly that. This list right here, I wouldn't say is an attempt to be that kind of deck. It is actually an attempt to kind of have a fighting chance against aggro and be kind of main decked for your weakest matchup. I don't know in general if that's a very good idea, but when you're playing against completely random opponents and not knowing that much about the meta, I guess that's a decent approach. But regardless, let's just jump right into the cards. And the reason I think Palpatine has a fighting chance against aggro is Emperor's Royal Guard. At 3 cost 3/5 is great, but with Sentinel, it's amazing. Therefore, we have to play a lot of officials. We don't play that many officials that cost 2 or less. Maybe we should play more Admiral Piets, but right now we only have 7 with 3 Yularen, 3 Governor, and 1 Piet. But we've gotten some new officials with Cobb Vanth and the Client. I think they are great additions to the deck. The Client is a little bit slow, but in the games where you can afford to play a little bit slower, being able to heal 5 is just tremendous. And with Cobb Vanth, I actually find myself killing him pretty often with Palpatine's ability, because his when defeated effect is so great. The 2 costs and 1 cost in this list are amazing, and not only in the early game, like sometimes more in the late game. Being able to have a Colonel Yularen so you can heal more, or a Regional Governor so you can stop your opponent's most impactful card, or Piet for a Walker with ambush, or just a Salacious Crumb so you can kind of infinitely bounce and heal. Those are really nice. And naturally, when you have a leader with deploy costs on 8, you want ramp. So we played Super Laser Technicians and Resupplies. Super Laser Technician has kind of gotten the bad rep that it can be played around, but because of Palpatine's ability, we can always securely kill it, which is great. And the Vigilance is a card that is kind of discussed if it's good for 6 or not. Some people would argue it's better to just play Rival's Fall. But as I said, I want this deck to kind of have a fighting chance against aggro as well. So that's why it's there. Being able to defeat a unit and heal 5 is really good. And then Escort Skiff is a card I actually consider going up to 3 because playing a 2-cost into Emperor's Royal Guard into Escort Skiff is amazing. You're basically guaranteed a 2-for-1 with Escort Skiff. So that's kind of the maybe the most strange card in this list. And playing only one Super Laser Blast I think is a little bit weird. Maybe we don't need one at all, but I like to have one in the list just to kind of scare our opponents. It doesn't help when it's a closed deck format, but it can help. Let's say your opponent sees your hand, or you get to play it in the first game, and then they kind of respect it for the other 2 games. And yeah, in some situations it can be good, but I think with all of the new cards we've seen with Smuggle and so forth, I don't think Super Laser Blast is as good as it was in the previous season. But yeah, I think that's enough ranting about the deck, and we can just review some gameplay, because I played against Breaker, a pretty good player in the Take the Initiative League. He has also been in the top cut for many seasons, I think. And he played a yellow Boba list that actually was not that much updated, I would say. He told me he hadn't played that much with new cards yet, so it kind of makes sense for him not to add too many. But it's not a set 1 deck, of course. It's playing Boba Fett's armor and so forth. And here we see just what I talked about, that amazing start when you have a 2-cost Emperor's Royal Guard into Escort Skiff. Of course, you're not going to get that ideal hand every time, but when you do, it feels really great. Resourcing the second Emperor's Royal Guard, I'm not sure if it's the correct option. Vigilance is not as needed playing against Yellow Boba compared to like a Sabine or a Kylo or something like that. So it could maybe be better to just have more units to play. But the Vigilance is pretty nice to kill shielded units, like a Crafty Smuggler, for instance. So here we see our opponent making us discard Overwhelming Barrage, which is pretty good for them, I would say. Resupply is of course nice to see, but not right now, because we have a much better play in ambushing Escort Skiff. So we're gonna do that, and we, as you can see, end up with a board looking very solid. So that's kind of what I mean with Escort Skiff always getting a 2-for-1. Now we have seen more 3-cost units having 5 HP, but that's, I would say, a little bit of an exception. Mostly you're able to take out the units with 4 resources. Here they play the Gamorrean Guards, kind of making us only have pretty awkward attacks, so I just decided to take the initiative instead. Our draws here are pretty bad. No good 5-cost card to play, like Overwhelming Barrage. The Vaders are very nice, but kind of dead in the hand right now, so I decided to resource one of them. So we at least have something to play with the Starfighter, or what it's called. At least we have a good trade here. Escort Skiff into Gamorrean Guards. But we're gonna see Boba having a flip turn now, and with Escort's Gift having left the field, he can ready some resources. I think Yellow Boba is going to be one of the most played decks. It was very, very popular in the end of last season, and I think it's only gotten better. The question is if decks that are favored into it gain popularity or not. Right now, there's a lot of craze around Han, and my next video as well is going to be on a Han game, I think. And Han, being a little bit more controlly than Boba, can have a decent matchup into it. Especially if you play very safe around all of the bounce and exhaust effects that Boba can have. But Sabine, of course, being very popular, is good for Boba. Boba has kind of famously been known to the answer as the answer to Sabine. But we're gonna see how that plays out if Boba Yellow is kind of consistent enough to beat the new Sabine now with a little bit more meat on the bone with Wrecker and so forth. Right, we're gonna see Vigilance taking out the 7 Fleet Defender, and having a shield on Colonel Yularen here is decent if it would fetch, for instance, a Emperor's Royal Guard with Vader, so we could give that Sentinel. You could argue it would be nice to give the spaceship the shield as well, so it wouldn't be as easily killed, because something like a Fet's Fire Spray is probably the most dangerous card for us. Regardless, we're not gonna have any more cards to play here, so we're gonna see a Boba unit being played and Bazine. Bazine, of course, being probably the the best card against control that you can play in Boba. So we're gonna lose Vader, but we are going to draw Piet and Salacious Crumb. Not really useful here. At least we have Palpatine to draw us another card, so that's something. In addition, we've only taken 7 damage and we're 1 turn away from Palpatine deploying. That means we could steal one of their units, except for Boba Leader, of course, or we could just play Super Laser Blast. But our opponent just played Sabine, and that means they also know that we have Super Laser Blast in hand, and they're probably not gonna overextend the board too much. And then, as I mentioned, now, especially with Smuggle and when people play around it, Super Laser Blast isn't kind of a comeback, really. It's more of stalling, because they're just gonna use 8 resources to replenish their board. Right here, I'm gonna use Palpatine on the Salacious Crumb to draw a card, and very sadly, that's another client, so not what we're looking for. At least I got to deal 1 damage on the Boba unit, so that's something we can take control of next turn. But yeah, this turn is looking very sad. Our opponent hasn't spent any resources, so here I'm just stalling, really, just attacking. So they decide to get rid of the shield on Colonel Yularen, and then I'm thinking, let's just get rid of Bazine, because of the new card called A New Adventure or something adventure. That's double cunning and cost 2. That lets you basically bounce a unit and replay it for free. And I don't want them to do that to Bazine and, for instance, get rid of our Super Laser Blasts. And here I'm faced with a very difficult decision. We have 2 units, they have 3. That means, I mean, we could of course blast, then we're at least saving 6 damage from our base, but our opponent has then 7 resources to just stabilize. And if they play something like a Fire Spray, we're not going to have any way of stealing that. So that's going to be, for instance, 10 damage to our base. So I'm thinking I don't want to blast this turn. I decided to start with the takedown on the Boba unit. I don't know if that was correct. I could have just deployed Palpatine and stopped that 3 damage from the Boba unit instead of killing the leader. But then they could have just attacked with the leader for 1 more damage onto our base, or even onto the Boba to get rid of that immediately. So it's not clear, to me at least, what was the best line on this turn. And I'm really happy to have that 1 resource up in case he plays something that I'm more scared of than the Boba. But we know a cunning Boba Fett is not going to have many huge units, right? Fett's Fire Spray is probably the most dangerous one. So here I am thinking 21 damage on my base. I can't greed anymore. I'm just going to deploy and take Boba Fett. So now we have some options. We can, of course, attack and sacrifice something with Palp, but our opponent now ambushes the Boba Fett unit, which kind of doesn't give us a way to clear the ground anymore. We can only deal 5 damage with 1 attack if we choose to defeat a unit to Palpatine's on attack ability. But here our opponent has spent all of the resources, so it's not going to be much of a difference if we do it as our action now or just as the first action in the next phase. And therefore I'm thinking I'll just claim and see if I might be able to top deck something that's even better to play. For instance, a Darth Vader would be really nice. But we draw Vigilance, which is also pretty good, especially when we're on 21 HP and we need a little bit more wiggle room. I decided to use it on the lackeys. Maybe it would have been better if I just attacked with Palpatine onto the bouncer and kind of sacrificed Yularen to deal 1 damage to the lackeys, and then saved the Vigilance for that spaceship. That way we would kind of know that our starfighter would survive, which is very, very valuable against Fire Spray. So in hindsight, I think that would have been a better line. Now we're going to see another bouncer returning the client to her hand. And now I decide to do the attack and sacrifice Yularen to draw a card and deal 1 extra damage. So then we're going to see Breakers trading in space. And I think there playing the client was not necessary. It's good to having on the board so we are able to get some healing done. But I think Power of the Dark Side would have been a little bit better, just to remove the bouncer, and then, I mean, we wouldn't be able to kill Boba Fett in one action. Oh yes, we would, because we just drew Overwhelming Barrage, so yeah. But I guess now we at least can somewhat guarantee a heal from the client. Sadly, he has another body, so we're not gonna get to Barrage, which would have been amazing for us. And now I'm faced with a very difficult decision. I could, one, either just attack into Boba and then defeat the client to deal 1 damage. That way I'm stopping the 3 damage from the Boba attack and I'm healing 5. But then I'm losing the client, right? And right now I'm thinking my opponent has 2 cards, I have 16 life. I'm kind of in a stable position right now. So I would rather play a little bit more greedy, let them attack with Boba, and then as my next action, attack with Palp and defeat Dr. Pershing instead. That way I'm still drawing the card, but I'm keeping the client on the board to possibly heal more next turn as well. So now we're gonna see a surprise strike on the base for 6. And here I could take out the bouncer, stopping 3 attack, but claiming the bounty is gonna do more, right? Because that's 5 health. So I am doing that and defeating Pershing to draw a card. And that's another Pershing. So that's kind of the thing with having a lot of 2-drops. You're inevitably going to draw them when you don't want to as well. But that's, as I said earlier, the good thing about the 2 costs in this deck is that they have so much utility. Like Dr. Pershing now is not that bad, it's gonna draw us cards, right? And or just be a body we could sacrifice to Palpatine. So I play Power of the Dark Side, just get rid of the body. And luckily for us, there are no big threats on our opponent's board. And now we finally get some good top decks. Notably, the client and Palp are officials, so we could get a Sentinel with the Emperor's Royal Guard. If I saw correctly there, I think we've resourced 1 and played 1. That's been defeated. So there should still be 1 left. But our opponent is on 8 resources, so we also have to kind of consider what we could face. But regardless, I'm thinking best course of action would be to play Vader here. As you can see, I also took a peek in the opponent's discard pile. And I think that's something you should do when you have choices like this, because right now we're faced with a very difficult choice. We found the Royal Guard, but we also found a Sentinel in space, and we're on 5 life, so that means we die to Surprise Strike on the ground, or we die to a Fire Spray in space. So right now we can only protect ourselves against one of those options. And our opponent has played a Surprise Strike already. So you can see in their discard pile, there's 1. So if we'd go from that, maybe it's more likely they have a Fire Spray in hand. But you also have to consider, let's say your opponent drew a Fire Spray or a Surprise Strike early on in the game. Is that a card they would keep in their hand for the right position? No, for the right time, for the right situation? Or is it a card they would maybe resource? That can also maybe influence the decision when you're thinking of what card they possibly have in their hand that could win them the game, right? But I'm going for the Star Viper and then using Ambush to kill the Cantina Bouncer. And luckily there's no surprise strike, so we take 2 damage to the base. And now we are kind of in a comfortable position to use the client again on the Crafty Smuggler. And since our opponent here spends 1 resource to play Greedo, I'm thinking they don't have that much to meddle with our plans or to disrupt Palpatine here. So I'm playing a little bit greedy, playing a Cobb Vanth, so I can defeat it with Palpatine's on attack. And then possibly find something great from the when defeated effect. So our opponent is doing some thinking here. So targets that we would be really happy to see with Cobb Vanth are Colonel Yularen, of course, so we could heal, or even a regional governor would be great. But we did see some regional governors with Vader, so we know we put them on the bottom of the deck. So now we're going to look at the top 10, and we also find a Salacious Crumb, which is nice, which we maybe could heal even more with than a Yularen, but I decide to discard Yularen. And then our opponent takes the initiative, and I think this game was maybe played in the evening because I was a bit tired and forgot to play Yularen. Let's see if it's gonna matter or not. We are now on 9-11 resources, so as you can see, Palpatine games tend to drag out for a long time. That's also one negative thing about playing Control or Palpatine, is that games take much longer. Of course, it's not necessarily an issue when you're playing at home or with friends for fun, but if you're playing at a tournament, that can really suck if your games go to time. So here I'm playing a regional governor and saying Fet's Fire Spray, because don't really have an answer in hand to that. And then our opponent decides to exhaust the client instead of attacking with the 7 Fleet Defender, which is really good for us because now we can play Snoke and take out both the Defender and Greedo. So they're gonna try to deal 2 damage, but they miss. And at this point, our opponent concedes. So even though we forgot to play that Colonel Yularen for free, it didn't matter in the end. And after a very long game, we managed to discourage our opponent from playing more. That's also another thing that's a little bit sad with Control, is that sometimes your opponent's just like, oh no, this is not fun anymore, I'm just being held hostage, and they just concede instead of getting to finish the game. But as I said, when you're short on time, you're more than happy with that. And seems like I've taken out a resupply here. I missed what the other 2 cards were, but it looks like I'm taking in a 3rd client, or the client. Yeah, and I want to take in some making openings, it looks like, because Boba Fett is known for having those shielded units, and now especially with the lurking tie, that's good to get rid of. Yeah, so I'm adding 2 making openings and the client, and taking out 2 resupplies and a walker, it seems. Alright. This hand is interesting, no 2-drop, but when you have Power of the Dark Side, you can always consider keeping it, because you're gonna have a card that deals with whatever unit they play. If they play unit, of course. And I have Vigilance and Takedown, which are also decent cards. But it's still not a great hand. You would much rather see something on the lines of what we had last game. So I'm deciding to resource it here. Okay, we didn't get the greatest hand either, but Make an Opening and Cobvanth are both okay cards. Of course, we would wish they play something with 2 or less life, so we could just get rid of it with Make an Opening. So that spaceship there is not at all what we want to see. Here we draw some cards we would like to see last turn. Starting with the Pershing, I think is pretty good, even against Boba, because it's just gonna help you get more answers. So now we're just playing Cobvanth, but sadly our opponent has even more space cards. At least we're gonna get a good use of Make an Opening now, but we're not gonna have anything else to play, so that kind of sucks. We have 1 resource left, so we could use Palpatine's ability and draw a card, but I decide to pass instead. And then here I'm faced with a difficult decision. We could either attack with Cobvanth and then play what we get from the defeated effect, giving up initiative, or we could keep initiative and then, for instance, play Overwhelming Barrage as our first action and just taking out Boba Fett that way. The problem is then we're of course losing Overwhelming Barrage, which could be a huge swing for us later. So now we have many lines that would be okay, I guess. Escort Skiff, ambushing in and surviving is not the worst. Colonel Yularen, kind of making a threat of us healing a lot is not the worst either. And then still being able to play the Sentinel in space. But I decide to just use the Barrage. And then pass. So now we're at least gonna get 5 damage on Boba Fett. And get to look at the top card of our top 10 cards of our deck and discard a 2 or 1 cost unit. I decide that's gonna be a Salacious Crumb, and I would say that's pretty nice because it can enable ambush on our Escort Skiff. But I did make the mistake of playing it here now as the next action, I think. I could just have passed and then played it after they attacked with Boba, or played something else. But again, then I'm giving up initiative, and I mean, if they trade, it's maybe not the worst for us, but they do decide to kill Salacious Crumb, and we just take the initiative. And luckily for us, even though they have 4 resources left, they don't have anything to play. So we're gonna go into the 6 resource turn here. Again, a lot of cards that are playable, but none that really stick out as a great play. Lauren is at least gonna heal us 1 and set us up for escort skiff, but it's gonna be a pretty obvious trade here for our opponent with Bodhi Rook. So then I'm just deciding to play a sad escort skiff on the board, which gets taken out by a shoot first on Boba Fett. And now we finally meet our demise with Fire Spray. And that's gonna be extremely tough to get rid of when we don't have a board at all. If we would have units on the board, we could maybe find an angle with Overwhelming Barrage. But now we're gonna just have to play Vader. Or it looks like I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna make an opening to get rid of Boba. I guess I'm effectively reducing the same amount of damage compared to an ambush with Vader. But now I have resources up for the Sentinel in space and possibly a ping with Palp. Still, when I look at this now, I think Vader would probably be better. Because we could get another unit on the board. Like a Royal Guard that we could give Sentinel next turn when Palpatine deploys. And now I kind of see, okay, I have 1 chance here, and that's me stealing that Fire Spray. So I sacrifice the Starship. But it should have been a red flag in my head that our opponent didn't trade with the Starship, right? And now we're gonna see why. That's because they had McClunky, so they get to return Fire Spray to their hand, and they just replay it and deal 5 more damage. And that's gonna be the nail in the coffin, because now it's not damage anymore, and we can't steal it. As you could see, they had to kill their Bodhi Rook because McClunky doesn't say you may deal 3 damage. So they had to deal damage to something. And now I'm just playing cards to play cards, really. There's not an out of this game. So we're gonna see Surprise Strike coming in for 8. And then, yeah, we get to barrage and kill that spaceship. But with 29 damage on the base, it's not gonna be enough. And especially not with the second Fire Spray. So as you can see, a little bit of a rough start, and our opponent drawing those Fire Sprays is very difficult to handle. So that's gonna be a 1-1 for now, and since this is a bit of a longer video, I'm gonna stop it there. So if you want to see the last game, tune into the next video. Alright, have a good one.